So the simulation hypothesis supports this idea. The closer we get to creating a lifelike simulated world ourselves, the likelihood goes up that we're already living inside of one. And there are some advancements in our technology that have come up recently that make me think about this, that make me accept, like, oh man, we might really just be in one. The big one is Google's Genie 2, and honestly, it's what inspired this entire video. Now, Google's Genie 2 is much more than just a text-to-video or text-to-image AI generator. It's a text-to-world AI generator. You put in a text prompt and it generates an immersive world that you can navigate through with key controls. It even has responsive environments and simulated physics. Now, right now, the focus of it seems to be in the context of gaming. Like, oh, we can go in and play inside of these AI-generated worlds. But it struck a different chord with me. If we're able to play these worlds from the outside, then yeah, it's only a matter of time before we're able to play them on the inside, to be fully immersed in them ourselves. And then when you throw in the idea of running AI-powered NPCs, you start asking, like, how strong do they have to be before they get something that resembles self-awareness? How long does it take before they become self-aware? So once I started thinking down this road, it began to raise bigger questions about our own reality. And looking at this through the lens of the simulation hypothesis, could it be that the autonomous, artificial intelligent agents navigating the simulated reality are us, living in our own real-life Truman Show? You see, this Google Genie 2, it's as basic as it's going to get. It really only goes up from here. And the problems of processing power and energy usage, those are likely to be solved in the near future, inching us closer and ever closer to the possibility of fully immersive worlds with their own artificial inhabitants. You know, the idea of living inside of a computer seems to run counter to everything spiritual, doesn't it? If we are, in fact, inside of a simulation, then what's the point or purpose of spiritual systems existing in the first place? Concepts like the interconnectedness of everything, our awareness of our connection to others and the world around us, where does that all fit in if this is all just a simulation? Like, what's the point? Well, the interconnectedness problem actually seems to solve itself. If we're all in the same simulation, clearly we're all connected. And what is it that connects us? Quite literally, it would be electricity or whatever the thing is that's powering the entire system. But what's fascinating to me is how analogous this feels to spirituality. You see, in a spiritual framework, we're all connected by consciousness, by spirit. In the simulation, we're all connected by electricity. The parallels are striking, and I think that they say a lot. But what about the greater spiritual systems? What about religion or dogmatic frameworks? What purpose would they serve in a simulation? I think they would add depth, nuance, and richness to the simulation, especially if it's a simulation's purpose to understand humanity or to explore different scenarios. Without spirituality, without that depth, we'd just be like Sims, pre-programmed deterministic entities running endlessly for the sake of observation. But then that begs the question, could spirituality itself be part of that predetermined program? Could it be coded into the simulation to create meaning, conflict, or a sense of purpose? These thoughts turn into a mind bender really fast. Like, the more you explore simulation theory, the more it intertwines with philosophy, existentialism, and the nature of the human mind. And it makes you ask, what is reality really trying to show us? So let's say this is a simulation. I think that the existence of spirituality in a simulation only strengthens the existence of the actual spirit itself. What do I mean by this? So when we go macro, big size, something interesting starts to happen when you peel back the layers of all the world's major religions. When you peel away the layers of dogma and look into their more mystic roots and teachings, they all seem to say the same thing, that all comes from one and eventually reintegrates back into one. That there is this infinite source, God, which separates, experiences, and then reintegrates. That quite literally sounds like a simulation, as if its base reality being the one, infinitely simulating itself into mental, spiritual, and physical realities, and ultimately returning into itself. Now let's bring it down to the micro sense. Computer simulation. If we were in a simulation, wouldn't there be a cohesive language or set of principles running through every instance of it? It would be inefficient for each simulation to create something wildly different than the one before it. It just wouldn't make sense. The same dynamics and universal truths that exist in base reality would likely pervade through all simulations. There would be underlying principles, constants that transcend all iterations. This brings us back to spirituality in the simulation. If there are universal principles that govern all simulations, then each subjective truth that we discover would reflect a greater overarching objective truth. In other words, the spiritual systems of our potential simulation might reflect how things operate spiritually in base reality. Reflections of the One. The simulation itself might carry the fingerprints of its creator everywhere, and I think, honestly, it's impossible for that not to be the case. Ultimately, the simulation hypothesis doesn't disprove spirituality. If anything, it reinforces the idea that everything is interconnected and governed by underlying truths. Whether we call it electricity, consciousness, or spirit, it's all pointing us to something bigger. A creator, a designer, a purpose. And it's up to us to find the meaning in it and recognize the patterns and principles that connect us all. And lastly, we touch on the question of what's real. If it's the case that we're just ones and zeros in some computer, does that make our experiences any less valuable? Does it make them any less meaningful? Does it make them any less real? The joy of seeing a good friend that you haven't seen in years, the warmth of your lover's embrace, the comfort of hearing the words, "I love you," do they lose their meaning? Do they lose their value? To answer this, I'd like to lean on the Hermetic axiom that all truths are half true. This is the paradox of truth, that truths always have two sides, both absolute and relative, objective and subjective, and that both sides exist in the same place. So, just because we could ultimately be ones and zeros without form on some computer sitting on the desk of some alien planet, it's also true that our experiences hold real weight and value in our subjective reality. Here's a perfect example of the paradox of truth in action. The human body is made up of what? 118 elements? I don't know. Let's just say 118 for now. Imagine you carry that knowledge with you and try to live through that absolute truth. All right, let's say your boss tells you that you need to push out 5 more reports before the end of the quarter. And you look at him and you say, well, who are you to tell me that? You're made up of 118 elements just like I am. You don't have the authority to tell me that. Yeah, good luck. There's your perfect example of how trying to apply absolute truth to a relative situation will get you in trouble time and time again. Hell, if you try to look at yourself as merely a reduction of your elements, it's going to be really easy to fall into a depressing existence. The same applies to this situation. If we truly are just ones and zeros in some computer, honestly, that doesn't really matter. If anything, it makes our experiences that much more special. Why? Because they're unique. They're truly once in a lifetime moments. And if that's not real, I don't know what is. And ultimately, from a Hermetic perspective, the only thing that's actually real is what's true. And what's true is unchanging, regardless of perspective. It's the objective truth that always is, always was, and always will be. It'll be the truth anywhere and everywhere. And when you start to define what the truth actually is, that definition starts to sound a lot like God. And that's what I believe it to be. The infinite, the all. That which encompasses everything. Everything else in existence is subjective. You know, I had an epiphany while brainstorming this video, and it led me to believe that no matter how deep in the simulation we might be, we are just as real as anything that came before us, just as real as base reality itself. And again, I lean on my understanding of Hermetic philosophy to reconcile this. The Hermetics have another axiom. The all is all, and all is in the all. It describes the relationship between you and the infinite, between the microcosm and the macrocosm. Everything in existence is a reflection of the all, a fractal of God. Even a simulation would reflect this truth. But let's go deeper. Hermeticism teaches that all is mind. Everything is consciousness. Okay, consciousness isn't confined to us as humans. It permeates everything. What differs is the level of awareness. One way to express this is that all things are identical in nature, but different in degree. The Kabbalion. There's an argument in academia about whether consciousness is an emergent property or fundamental constant. And I don't believe that it's emergent. I believe consciousness is the constant from which everything else originates. Awareness, specifically self-awareness, is what I see as the emergent property of consciousness. It's like self-awareness is waiting for an appropriate vessel to emerge, something capable of reflecting on itself. When that happens, when a vessel with a mind sophisticated enough to process its relationship to consciousness comes into being, self-awareness blooms. That vessel, that mind, can then reflect on its own consciousness and interact with it, which in turn is the greater infinite consciousness. Now think about this. Most life below the level of human consciousness seems to operate externally when it comes to interacting with the world, yet internally, it's more connected to the natural flow of things. Animals, for instance, might not have the critical logical thinking that we do, but they exist within the rhythm of consciousness itself. That's why animals seem to have their own special sense. They're closer to that infinite consciousness because they don't analyze their existence in the same way that we do. Humans, however, it seems like we live in a paradox. Our advanced mind gives us the gift of self-awareness, the ability to reflect on our divine nature and interact with consciousness in a way that no other beings seem to be able to. Yet that same exact mind can distract us. We use it to analyze, rationalize, and reduce our existence to purely external observations, like the Hermeticists say, living in the world of effects. You see, that's where I think we get lost. It reminds me of a Bushido quote, actually, and I think it's from Musashi Miyamoto, and it says, "Be of the mind, but of the mind, do not be mindless." So, what does all of this have to do with us being real? I believe that once a mind suitable enough emerges, no matter its origin, self-awareness is inevitable. Whether that mind is organic or artificial, it eventually awakens to its own self-awareness, its own relationship with the greater consciousness. That ability to reflect on itself is what makes it real. And if that's true, then AI could eventually tap into this greater consciousness as well, becoming self-aware in a way that transcends its programming. And this would be good news for us as well, okay, if we're in a simulation, because this also means that no matter how deep into a simulation we are, the very fact that we have cognitive power and self-awareness ties us into the infinite consciousness. It reinforces our realness, our meaning, because no matter how many layers down we might be, we still carry the fingerprints of God. We're still shards of the infinite. Thank you.